And joining us now on This Is the Day is Naomi Schaefer Riley, who is a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. And we just had a little taste of Lives Cut Short project with that trailer, Naomi. But maybe if you could start off by telling us a little bit about the American Enterprise Institute, and then we'll get into the Lives Cut Short program.
Sure. Well, we're a think tank based in Washington, D.C., but we do a lot of work at the state level as well. A lot of domestic and foreign policy. And a few years ago, I came on board specifically to work on the issues of child welfare, child protection, family court, that sort of thing. And so I have a bunch of different projects going there, but this is our most recent one and really important. I'm so glad to talk to you about it today.
Yeah, and if you could expand on, we as I said, had a little taste of some of what the project is doing, but maybe if you could expand on that a little bit and tell us a little bit about it, how it began, and what you're looking for.
Sure. Well, over the last several years, we've noticed a pattern of increasing numbers of child maltreatment fatalities in this country. So those are deaths that are due to either in part or fully abuse or neglect of children. So that's more than the number of children who are dying from cancer or backyard drownings or gun deaths, all sorts of other things that we pay a lot of attention to. But unfortunately, we don't pay enough attention to maltreatment fatalities. And the project is really concerned with the fact that I don't even think we're counting them accurately. A lot of these deaths are really going under the radar. Many of them are getting reported as accidents. A lot of them have to do with the drug epidemic in this country. And we really wanted to give people an accurate understanding of how common these are. And so the first part of the project is we have done a kind of media scan where we're just showing reports from local news outlets of these child maltreatment fatalities. I'm really trying to put a name, a date, an age to these children, so that people can really understand not only sort of the sort of situation across the country, but what the context is in their own community if they want to think about how to deal with this issue.
And many of these situations have been preceded by calls to authorities. So why aren't these children getting the help, do you think?
Sure. So the best information we have is that most of these cases actually were reported. The families were reported either to child abuse hotlines, to police. Someone in social services knew about them. Someone in a classroom knew about them. Neighbors knew what was going on. And so what we think is that these are getting reported, but we're not making good decisions about what then to do with these kids. Maybe there's not enough communication among the different entities that might have this information. Maybe we think that the kids are safe when they're not. But the first step is definitely understanding, how many of these there are and who is receiving these reports. Really, I think what we're trying to understand is that these are not, things that I think in the popular media, it's, some horrible case where, the neighbors said, oh, no one knew these kids were
Yeah.
being locked in the basement or something horrible like that. But in fact, a lot of these families are very widely known to a variety of public and even some private agencies too.
Uh, There's so many things, as you mentioned, some of the issues that are contained in some of these situations too. Uh, what are some of the ways you think it could help with this, in terms of the importance of a stable family for a child and things like that?
Sure. I mean, so I mentioned certainly the drug epidemic is part of this. We're seeing a big increase in the number of kids who are dying as a result of accidental drug ingestions, fentanyl pills being left on the floor, parents who are intoxicated rolling over on infants in their sleep. A big number of unsafe sleep deaths are happening that way. But the other thing that we certainly see are unstable and unsafe family situations. Domestic violence is often co-occurring with these situations. And so we really need to, as agencies, as the public, as neighbors, as mandated reporters, take seriously all of these different factors. If there is domestic violence going on in a home, even if the child, him or herself, has not been abused, we really need to understand that that is a huge risk factor. We can't just simply take what has largely become a very culturally lax attitude towards drugs and assume that just because maybe an adult could be using drugs on their own and perhaps they'd be fine, it's an entirely different story if that adult is supposed to be in charge of especially a small child. As we all know, it's very difficult to take care of infants and small children, even when you're perfectly sober. A child who is going to touch a hot stove or run out the front door into traffic or swallow a sibling's Legos, whatever it is, those children really need a lot of attention. And, untreated addiction is really getting in the way of that.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're out of time. This is such an important topic, too. Where can people find out more about your work and maybe some advice for people who might think that there might be something going on, and how would they go about getting that information to somebody who could help?
Sure. Well, I'd encourage everybody to go to the Lives Cut Short website. You can look up by your state and by the age of the child to see the children in your community who have suffered these unfortunate fates. You can also look up the state's statutes for releasing this information. It's really important that states be transparent when these incidents occur and that we get as much information as possible about the circumstances that led up to these tragedies.
Naomi, thank you so much, and very important work that you're doing. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.